Yeah, we got a very special guest today. Could you do me a favor and introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely. My name is Lindsay Weisner. I'm a psychologist, the host of the Neurotic Nourishment Podcast. I also have a blog on Psychology Today called the Venn Diagram Life, because I'm a huge fucking dork. Ooh, am I allowed to?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Good. Sorry. Because I'm a huge dork. And then I released a book at the beginning of quarantine, which did not become a bestseller because of quarantine, but it's called 10 Steps to Finding Happy. And it's basically 10 scientifically proven steps to finding happy or happier. So
Great. And we'll put the links in the description. So we'll get that going. And I'm glad that you're joining us today, with your expertise. Again, I do have to put a disclosure out there. This isn't
therapy, sure.
Yeah. This is like,
thank you.
So we put that out there. And but I do want a little insight into what could possibly be the reasons behind certain behaviors of youth that are incarcerated.
Sure.
And and the outcome, like what are some possibilities that could happen to a lot of these people that went through this trauma. So the first thing I want to do is just give you a few terms first that we'll probably visit a lot, that are basically jail terms, YA terms. One is case. A case is basically somebody has no respect. They're easily victimized. A lot of times they have to pay for protection, right? So that's a case. A leva is somebody who also doesn't have respect, and they once did. At a point they did have respect and they got dropped leva. So we have that case, leva, and a fuck. When you throw a fuck is basically when you basically say, like, I'll give you an example. If anyone touches this pen, fuck your dead shit. That's a fuck, right? So it's declaring nobody is allowed to touch this pen. If you do, there will be consequences. And that's the disrespect of your dead family members, dead homies, or dead loved ones, right? So
Okay.
Okay, so now we got that out the way. So one thing that I have a lot of people reaching out to me about is for me to interview a case, right? Interview somebody who, and I'm not opposed to that. However, I know a lot of them probably don't want to revisit that time in their life.
Sure.
So for a lot of cases, they would end up getting, like I said, victimized, socked out, beat up, their stuff taken. What kind of an impact could that have for a juvenile, a minor, at such a young age for so many years, going into their future life?
Sure. I mean, to sort of start at the beginning, the truth is the brain of an adolescent, a teenager, like our brains don't fully develop until we're 25. Mm-hmm. And the issue that I always talk about with teenagers, in particular, have worked a lot with suicidal teenagers, is that it's like a fight between the amygdala or the limbic system, which is in the back of the brain, and then the prefrontal cortex, which is in the front of the brain. I like to describe it as like Pam, the prefrontal cortex, is super logical and rational, is going to get your ass off the table when you're drunkenly dancing on a bar table. Not that that would ever happen to any of us here, but and then, limbic Linda is like all fun and no consequences. And eventually the two have to meet, but it takes time. And so as our brains are developing, things that we're exposed to, it turns out, can really affect us. For example, kids tend to there was a couple of studies, they looked at kids 11 to 14, they found that they had a larger amygdala if they were exposed to more violence as a kid. So if you grew up with violence, community violence, you're exposed to more. And then they looked at the size of the brain and then how they reacted when they were talking to their parents, and independently, reviewed them. And it turned out that kids with a larger amygdala, it's the emotional part of their brain, were more aggressive when it came to talking to their parents. The other thing that happens is that when you're exposed to community violence, over time, your reaction ends up decreasing the more you're exposed to violence. So you have reduced empathy, like you don't care as much.
Yeah.
You know, clearly. Sorry, my microphone has a problem. All of these brain changes are going on as you're growing up and as you're exposed to it. So even before you get into the case of being a case, no pun intended, but accidentally came out, you've sort of got some strikes against you. And so there is this theory called learned helplessness, which is basically the idea that like you sort of curl up in a fetal position and just give up, you know? And I can imagine if you're beat down your whole life, and then you end up, you know, incarcerated, and then no one's respecting you. You have to pay for protection. You're assaulted. Something happens. It really increases your feelings of learned helplessness. It's also about something called a locus of control, which, okay, so I'm a football fan. In particular, I was just stopped in to visit the game upstairs. It's not very good. But in particular, I'm a wide receiver fan because there's nothing as gorgeous as that like one-handed catch. And then there's nothing as disappointing to me when they come down and thank God, because it totally is like I don't know, like be so proud. Like you worked your ass off. Like you only eat boiled chicken. Like, you know, you train like 10, 11 months, like be proud. And so putting that off on God, on exclusively God, let me be clear, is saying that it's not you that has the control. It's something outside of yourself. And so similarly, if you're a case and if you have been through all of this and still have no control, it can sort of result in a giving up, forget it. There's nothing I can do. There's nothing I should do. I might as well just give over my power to someone else. And whether that's a conscious or a subconscious, it's really a hopelessness. And it can definitely be a point in a cycle of giving up and not caring and not advocating for yourself and not moving on to something bigger.
So that's interesting because it's like in this case, the other thing that they'd give it up to is the other wards. So they're basically saying, okay, I can't do anything about this.
So you help me.
Yeah. That's interesting. Even if it comes to a point where they're being victimized, they're still being helped because it's like, it's their way. Wow, that's very, very interesting.
It's literally like someone who forgets, for lack of a better words, like forgets that they can swim when they're splashed with water, you know? And it's really, it starts early, but I also think some of us are more predisposed to it than others. I have 2 kids. One would fight to her death, no questions asked, and has since she was little. And the other one would probably like roll over and just, you know, not necessarily incarcerated, but just in general, you can see different fighting spirits in people, but it's also about how they're raised. So
now that's really interesting too, because if they're raised in the same home, how does one have that?
Well, I wasn't the same person. A couple things. I wasn't the same person. I was a very anxious first-time mom, and I think I hovered like hell. And then the other thing is, she had a tougher. My daughter was in the hospital for meningitis when she was 8 weeks. She had a seizure and then was there. And then at 2 years, she broke her tibia, the bottom of her left leg going down a slide. At the part, don't let them sit on your lap. It doesn't go well, especially those like curvy slides. And then at 3, she fell off the monkey bars and fractured and dislocated her, again, I think left arm, left humerus, something. The point is, she was a mess and like was constantly in the hospital, and she was angry as fuck. So I think she was angry and she was a fighter, and my son was more coddled. Is that always the rule? No, it could have been just that he's got different parts of us in it, but there's definitely I know that I hovered above him, you know, like I watched him walk upstairs as though he was made of glass. So it's a mixture of nature and nurture, you know, of what you're born with, or like the genes, and then the environment you're grown up in.
And another thing I wanted to ask is, so something that's very common in the youth authority is, or when the youth authority is around, was like showing no mercy for your enemies.
Sure,
right?
you can't.
So
That's weakness.
yeah, exactly. So it's seen as weakness. And I know there's a lot of people who have commented, said, if I was there, I would have changed things. We shouldn't be doing that to each other. And a lot of people say that, but everyone who was there participated in this kind of, do you think that when people say that they genuinely believe that they wouldn't allow that to happen? And what happens when they get there? Why would that change their belief in not letting that happen and them just going with the flow?
So very interestingly, last week, I watched a documentary on the Lucasville, I think it's Ohio, Dayton, Ohio. Yeah, Lucasville prison riots. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's
No, I haven't heard of it.
Okay, I hadn't either, but it came across Netflix, and I'm a sucker for crime so there you go. But it was basically the prisoners took over the prison. It was a maximum security. So these are like city kids in the middle, or they weren't kids, but like, city people in the middle, like hardened criminals in the middle of a suburban Ohio town, which I don't know. I'm from New York. You're from California. To me, it sounds like a shit deal. But it ended up being a total disaster, and it did not go well. It eventually ended pretty well, but the interesting thing was they were interviewing some of the prisoners and some of the guards years later, and you could sort of see how like some of the prisoners, like there was this one guy who was talking about the fact that like he knew something was coming, he didn't know what, he made sure he had enough weed, and he went back and like his goal was like, I'm gonna get high and stay in my cell. And like we call that anxiety disorder, and you found something to treat it in prison in the 1993. So that's your way of dealing with it, and fine. And then there were other people who claimed that they thought something different was going to come about, or they didn't, or they played down their role, or this was the only way of surviving. There's a lot of rationalization, which makes sense, because if you're in a fucked up world, you have to come up with something that makes sense. I have a friend who went to prison for a few years, and what she said was like, I have to find a way to live among them, but not become them. And that wasn't in a negative way. It's just, you can't let it take over your whole brain. She left, she came out, she moved on ish as much, I mean, obviously battle wounds remain.
Yeah. And what are the differences between people who will rationalize, say, I just did what I had to do to survive, and those who really thrived in that environment? Those are like, yeah, this is what I love to do. Like, I'm going to fuck this place up. Like, this is my house.
I think a better question would be, is there really based on the color of your skin, the money, the financial status you're born into, the societal, status that you're born into, like, is there much of a difference? And I would say that depending on how you learn to rein that in and how you learn to use it, you can either be like a badass Wall Street, man with no soul, makes a lot of money, sticks within the lines.
Yeah.
Or in a different set of circumstances, you can end up as, a criminal who really thrives on something. I don't think there's that far of a gap between like antisocial personality disorder, which we like to put more with criminals, or like a narcissistic personality disorder, where it's kind of similar. I think part of it is the lot that you're dealt, and then yes, there's also what you do with it, but it's also the reality is like we don't live in an equitable world, and so that definitely plays a role. I think there's a greater lack of empathy in those that fall into both of these categories, regardless of whether you're a white Wall Street businessman or a person of color who's sort of antisocial and in jail, and this is the values that you've been raised with. I also don't know that I think a person of color Wall Street businessman is as likely to be narcissistic or in that same like antisocial personality, because I think there's way too much need to watch where you're stepping, so to speak, for people of color. And so it's unfortunate, but I'm just calling it like I see it.
No, definitely. Yeah, because it's like for those who are, like they said, like the white males that has been there, you know what I mean? They have had that established for years.
100%.
Yeah, that's their culture. Those are their traditions. For everybody else, it's like you're stepping into their world, so you have to act appropriately, get in where you fit in, kind of thing.
Also, like connections, family connections, or wealth, you know, cultural, school, academic, whatever it is. Like, there's something to be said about. I feel like if you have the path already laid out before you, you've got more of a leeway than if you don't, in which case you have to follow the rules of someone else and be super careful, which I'm not approving. I'm simply acknowledging.
Yeah, now that you brought that up, let me ask about that. How common is it for somebody who doesn't, or why is it, I should ask, that people that only see certain dynamics and cultural traditions, like let's say gangbanging, for example, that's all they've seen their entire life. Why is it hard for them to see anything outside of that at such a young age?
Sure. I mean, it's a couple of things. It's one, it's that, again, the more violence you see and the more frequently and the more extreme, you become desensitized to it. Like, it just doesn't make a difference. I have a potty mouth and my kids don't really flinch anymore. And like, they know they can't say it and they'll get mad if they do, but like, still there's no like extreme reaction, you know? And it's what they're used to. Now, if my husband swore, they would lose their minds because he is, you know, never swears. Yeah. But so we do get used to certain things based on our environment. So that's the first thing. And again, more brain studies, desensitization, their emotional part of their brain reacts less when they're exposed to more physical violence. I imagine the same goes for sexual violence, because that's the thought that occurred to me while I was thinking about all this. Probably, I don't know, I'd imagine that some sort of violent pornography or exposure to sexuality or sexualness has to play a part as well. But yeah, in general, the more exposure we have, the more of a norm something becomes. It's also a matter of what are the options we have at our disposal. Recently on my podcast, I spoke to this guy named Darius Baxter, who is he's in DC. Specifically, he's working on, he has this thing called Good Projects in targeting Anacostia, which is like a notoriously bad neighborhood, although it's apparently getting better because a very white therapist I know, white Jewish therapist, posted a picture of her and her kids on this fantastic looking playground, and someone said, "Where is that?" And she said, "Anacostia." So gentrification. But Darius is working to work within this to provide the youth with a new possible future. And I think that's the other aspect of it. If all you know is survival by emulating what you've seen, by repeating, you know, the actions of those around you, if the only way out of poverty and out of homelessness or helplessness is selling drugs, you're more likely to do that. And I think that is the gateway drug to, you know, I think selling drugs is the gateway drug, not, you know, not other things. And so it's two things. It's like biological, and it's also having to break free from the norm that's been shown to you.
And you brought up, you know, sexual behaviors within minors. And so I want to touch on that because there's, although not everybody engaged in like rapes or things of that nature, you know, there was a handful that, you know, like that, and nobody called them out on it. And that's another thing people always say is like, I wouldn't have let that happen. But while you're there, you're just like, it's
a norm.
That's what happens. Right. So what do you think it is that drives I'm gonna ask two questions. I'll start with the first one. What do you think it is that drives those wards that would do that, to doing that, to be raping somebody? Because like me, I never was like, whoa, I want to rape somebody. Like that's like that never even crossed my mind. Like that's crazy, that's ridiculous. But for other people, they would make the excuse like, oh, we're doing a long time, but we wouldn't really
Well, that was one of
yeah,
my, I was going to say, like,
yeah.
did the length of time play a factor?
Sometimes they said that, but it's strange because there were some words who got there at 13, 12 years old, and that's, you know, a lot of them didn't have any past sexual experience before that. There were other people like me, got there at 16, had a little bit more, you know, so maybe I was like, that's kind of weird, I'm not messing with that. But then there were other people who did maybe 2-3 years and they're already raping people. It's like, whoa, like other people, at least they waited 5-6 years. But yeah, so it's like, so
They
to me,
say that, I mean, they say that rape is about power, not sex. And like, obviously, to me, that's always been a little foolish, because obviously it's about both, you know, like if you're getting off, it's about sex, but there is a power component as well. And I think when you're in the system and people are feeling powerless, like any way you can feel power helps. And so it might just be a question of like frustration tolerance. You know, some people have different frustration tolerance than others. And I don't mean sexual frustration. I just mean like looking to release that frustration in whatever way possible, whether that be sexual or by feeling, you know, some sort of power, which is why like the best thing you can do in prisons is like when you give people like jobs or tasks, or like, you know, like you work in the, you know, XYZ, like these things it can give you a feeling of power, and that doesn't have to come from sexual assault, rape, beating the shit out of someone, you know. That doesn't mean it eliminates it, but it certainly gives another way for us to feel more in control. I mean, listen, during this fucking pandemic, like, I love the people that are like, oh, this is against our constitutional rights to wear. It's not, but I get that we all want to feel some sort of control. I Googled the shit out of it because I knew that it wasn't somehow in my brain. But we all need to find a way to feel in control in out of control times. You know, I'm not equating, obviously, prison.
No, it makes sense though, because I seen that with the assaults, but I never made the connection, because there was this one guy, I'm not gonna put his name out there, he passed away, may he rest in peace. But whenever he had an enemy on the cottage with him, they were both respected guys, but whenever he would get bad news, he would beat the shit out of the other guy. Like he would just come and beat. I'd be like, damn, like that fool takes all his frustrations out of him. That's fucked up.
Yeah.
But I didn't really think about it the other way when it came to people raping people. Maybe because I was just so thrown off by the whole thing. Like, whoa, like these motherfuckers are weird, right? But yeah, you're probably right. There's probably a lot going on at home. There was a lot going on in their life. You know, maybe they're not gonna make parole. Maybe a lot of things happen.
I think also as a woman, like we're told from a young age that rape isn't about sex, it's about power. And part of the reason, I mean, not super young, I don't remember being like 8 or 9, but you know, we're taught pretty early on. And part of that is because there are women that may, and probably men as well, that may get raped, but may reach orgasm, climax, whatever we're gonna call it. And the idea is like, it's not your fault idea, or just because you came doesn't mean you're gay or liked it or whatever. And so one of the things that women are taught, I think probably more than men, and have drilled into us, is like rape is about power, not sex. And so I think that's a helpful way to look at it. You know, and also it's the difference between the biological reaction, the emotional reaction, intellectual reaction.
And the second part of that question is going to be about the person being raped. So what kind of an impact would that trauma have on them once they left those walls? Like knowing that if they go back to jail, like they're probably going to become victimized again, so they can't return to that life. But like they've experienced it. What kind of trauma could follow them once they're released?
Sure. I mean, I can't say I've ever worked with anyone who was raped in jail, but having worked with people who were victims of sexual abuse, like as a child and now they're adults, or early on in childhood and now they're teens or 20-somethings, you know, it really fucks with them. And they definitely wonder if it was their fault, how much it affects them today. Substance abuse increases dramatically. there's also a really fucked up, for lack of a better word, statistics that says that if you were people that were sexually abused once or raped or whatever it is are more likely to have it happen again. And if I had all the money in the world, that would be what I would study, because I really want to know why and what that's about. And I don't, and no one has really found a good answer. And I don't know if it's that learned helplessness or if it's a failure to trust yourself. But anytime there's a trauma, we feel guilt, we feel blame, we feel horror. A few years ago, I was in a car accident that was bad because of the unexpectedness, but my physical injuries were I recovered within a few months. It was, but one of the first things I did, the next day, was I took my rental car and drove up and down that road, because I was not going to, I'm a shrink, my husband's a shrink. I was not going to let trauma, succumb me, or to give myself a chance to develop a phobia or an avoidance of it, Yeah. And often you can be triggered by irrelevant things, or, things that seem unrelated, or smells or sounds. It's a horrible way to live, especially if it happens more than once, which is more common. Yeah. In which case, then you start doubting your own ability to make judgments.
That's very interesting. Yeah, because one thing that is pretty common, or was pretty common in youth authority, is if somebody allowed themselves to get raped once, or I shouldn't say allow themselves, because they're young, they don't know any difference. But if it happened once,
it would happen.
Yeah, definitely. There's open season on them.
Right, but that's two things. To me, that speaks more to the culture of this person is an easy victim. Mm-hmm. Whereas where it confuses me more is out in the wild, so to speak, in the world, where people, why is a woman who was sexually abused as a child more likely to be raped as an adult?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know the answer. And it's my, if I were to go back and rewind history, that would be my life's mission, to find out that question.
And something you brought up at the beginning was a lack of empathy, right?
Yep.
And so I know we when we were getting ready for this interview, we texted back and forth about, you asked questions about the games. I kept talking about the games we played, right? So the games were, as a lot of people know that watch this, they're just different set of rules that we had that we abide by, and we called them games. And a lot of the times these could result in assaults. They could result in time ads. It's a lot of consequences to playing these games. But if you wanted to be respected, you had to play them. Do you think because of our, us being juveniles and adolescents, we called them games, and that's how we set up this hierarchy? Or what do you, how do you, what do you think?
I was thinking about that, and what I wrote down was games equal status thing. So yeah, I think it's part of the hierarchy. You called it games, but there's a couple things, there was nothing fun about any of this. And also, I think that's why I had trouble, and why we were texting back and forth, because I was I'm confused by the games issue. They're not games. They're rules. They're a structure. They're a hierarchical system. Hierarchical, whatever. It's definitely, it's an expectation. It's it's a cultural, I'll call it jail culture. Perhaps there's a better word, incarceration culture. I don't think it matters. And I don't think we're mincing words, but there's a certain expectancy of, it almost seems very old English, so I know there's a king, or right now a queen of England, and I know that the kids are not it's not, I know that there's a duchess, but I don't understand how they all go together. But it seems like this false, right? Kate is the duchess. I don't fucking know. Of York, someone's the Duchess of York. I don't know. But it seems there's this system. It's almost like chess, but with a random assignment. Actually, that's how I view chess, frankly. I don't play checkers, chess. It's a random assignment of places and people, and what you can do and what you can't do. And when you said games, I was confused because games involves there's a way to play and win.
Yeah.
And there's no way to play and win in what you described to me.
Yeah, that's kind of true. Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
You just basically lose.
Right. And so that was what was throwing me. I was like, how is it a game? Like in a game, I could at least win. But if I am put into a category or blocked by, people or, if I am a minority within a group, which does not mean a minority or BIPOC or, I mean, like if I'm white and that is the minority, or if I'm Arab and whatever it is, like, I don't think there's any moves that I can make or things I can do in this game to get me out of it. So I thought that was interesting. And I think that was the reason there was a disconnect because it was an interesting way to look at things. And I think we just mean it's a different set of structural rules. And so do you have to play with the rules of what you're given? You kind of do.
Yeah.
And I think it's smart to play. And yet I hope that when you come out, you haven't played any moves that have that linger on, because post-traumatic stress is a real thing. I know it's a thing for pussies and all, but like that's why I drove up and down on that road like repeatedly.
Yeah.
Because my kids' elementary school was on that road and I couldn't risk not being able to drive on that because that would have been a disaster.
And sticking with the lack of empathy in games, right? The second game that I brought up to you was the shooting game.
Yeah, that's a horrible fucking game. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like you disrespect somebody's deceased loved ones, and as soon as they see you, it's on. And there were people who love to play that. Like they
that's
love
not playing anything. Like even like if you think about the Old West, and yes, this is me being a middle-aged white woman, who's never been, I mean, I visited, but it's like a monopoly, just pass and go, whatever, just visiting. But there's something to be said about like it's not a game. It's like it's a threat. It's a punishment. God forbid it becomes a reality, and yet it's become normalized by calling it a game.
Yeah, interesting. That's very interesting. So you think that that was part of our way of dealing with the brutality, minimizing it, was calling it a game. Like,
I think so. And or it's also inviting someone to play.
Mm-hmm.
It's not only minimizing it for yourself, it's also minimizing it for everyone else. Like if it's a game, what's the harm in playing? But if it's someone might die, or we might insult the memory of a loved one you've lost, like that's different.
Yeah. And you think that was chosen because of the as a way to lose empathy, or because people were losing empathy already? They lost their empathy to disrespect somebody's deceased loved one.
That's a good question. That's a good question. I don't know. It could have been both. It might have also started as a way to hide things from the guards. I don't know. Again, just watched a Netflix documentary, so I'm all about that. But there's a code. There is like a slang, a code, a language that people pick up that on the inside that you don't understand on the outside. And even being taught it doesn't carry the same weight.
Yeah.
It took me a while to arrive at the fact that this was a game, but not a game, and it took you a while to be like, oh wait, this wasn't a game. This is, and obviously you knew you're a smart guy. You knew it wasn't a game, but it was just what it was called.
Yeah.
Whereas I thought we were talking about some sort of Russian roulette-esque deal. Also should not be called a game, but nonetheless, people are stupid. So, I think it was I think it probably served a lot of purposes, like most things.
And I want to go into a little bit of how I felt growing up. Now, I have went to therapy, and
therapy doesn't cure. Therapy doesn't cure. Everything. Yeah.
Yeah, but it really helped. It really helped me, my outlook on things, and I have a better handling of things now. But when I was a kid, and this is one thing that I forgot to bring up. My therapist is now retired, and great guy. Love that guy. But one thing that I never understood is when I would get bored, really bored, I would just say, I want to fuck something up. Like, I just wanted chaos.
Yeah.
Why do you think that was? Why is that the go-to for a lot of people? And let me explain something, or tell you about something else, something called cell extractions, right? So this is
Okay.
something that's common. I think it has to do with the feelings I had. I never been part of a cell extraction because I thought that was a little extreme. But what people would do is, let's say they come to your door, right? And if you're in lockup, this mainly happens in lockup. Your lockup's are cells. Everything else is dorms.
Yep.
If you're in lockup, they have a window they could see you. You're gonna block the window. They're gonna tell you, take that down. You're gonna be like, fuck you. I ain't taking shit down, right? Then they're gonna spray you. They're gonna open your tray slot, spray you, take it down, end up fogging you until they come with the cameras and have to forcefully remove you. And people would do that, and I'd just be like, why?
Why wouldn't you just take it down? I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, that's part of the question. I'm asked. That's what I like. What I'm thinking. I'm thinking maybe there's a connection between the way I felt at times, where like I'm bored. I just feel like I need to do something. Do you think that'd be the reason why a lot of them would resort to those kind of tactics?
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, definitely.
Did you, the house that you grew up in, was it predictable and calm?
No, not at all. No, I actually, that's one thing I always tell everybody. I didn't, we were homeless for a while, and I didn't know where we were going to sleep at times. And, one of the craziest things that I always remember is when I heard good times happening, it made me very nervous because at the end of the night, I knew there was going to be fights. I knew my mom and dad were going to find a reason to fight. And it always started with the fights always started with a smile.
Yeah.
So
don't you think that, in a way, not having to wait for the next shoe to drop or blow to fall or for things to go from that smile to whatever came next, that explosion, it's almost like you'd rather bring on that explosion because it's the anticipation, it's the waiting for shit to get fucked up that is worse.
So in a way, it's kind of like things are a little calm right now, way too calm.
Exactly.
Like,
yeah.
So
it makes me uncomfortable. Like things are going fine. Shit, things are gonna get fucked up soon. I'd rather have it now where I can be prepared for it.
That's very interesting. Yeah, and and it's crazy because for the cell extractions, like that's really difficult to it was difficult for me to comprehend, but now it makes a lot more sense. Maybe things were just a little too calm in their life at that time. Maybe there wasn't
right, or maybe they had more control when they were bringing on the shit, for lack of a better word. Fog is fine, but I swear like a sailor. So I promise I'm a doctor, but I do swear like a sailor, even with my patients. But like, there's something to be said about if you can't have you don't feel like you have any control. One way to control things is to bring on the madness. And I think that's a way to bring on the madness, so to speak, is to, again, I'm not calling like the incarcerated mad. I'm just calling the fact that what happens when you have to, bring on a fogger and all this other shit, like that's madness,
Yeah, it is.
But yeah, it's a way of feeling in control of an out of control world.
That makes a lot more sense. Yeah. And so once we, like what I noticed for a lot of people that were released from that system, the California Youth Authority, they ended up shutting it down in the mid 2000s because it was a failure of a system. 90% recidivism rate, 5% death rate within the first 5 years.
Wow.
So and that was one thing that I had a lot of homies from my neighborhood that went to YA that ended up passing away as soon as I got out. How much of an impact does that have on a development? Like you said, you don't really mature till about 25. This happened when I was about 20, 21 years old. I started losing people like crazy. How much of an impact does that have on somebody going forward?
I mean, you tell me. I mean, listen, 25 is an estimate. I think it's somewhere between 21 and 25. I like to scare the crap out of my younger patients by telling them 25. It's really an estimate, and it depends on a number of things. I think it also depends what you do with it. I mean, you mentioned that your parents got sober.
Yeah.
Did they stay sober?
No, my dad ended up passing away from cirrhosis of the liver.
I'm sorry to hear. It's also something I can relate to. My mother, has not killed herself yet, but will. Yeah, she tries very hard at it, and she's very bad at it. So go figure. I think that certainly what we go through, but also what we come out of, affects us, and it depends how you look at yourself. I feel kind of proud of where I've come from and what I've made of myself. Like on paper, it's lovely, but if you look at anything on court documents or whatever, it's not so much. And I think that for you, perhaps, well, the same is true. I don't know, but there's something similar to be able to say, I decided what is important in my life and what is not. And there's something about taking control, not being, okay, be that wide receiver, catch that ball, fucking beautiful. And then thank God, but also be like, and I worked my ass off, which is not biblically approved, I know. But there's something to be said about learning that you have a say in your environment, you have some control over it. And perhaps other people haven't made the best decisions. And then some people are just going to get the shit end of the stick. But the important thing is to come out of it not looking at it as though there's nothing you can do in the future. And perhaps knowing that the more you learn and the more you grow, the more you can do in the future. Also not feeling guilty because you were a kid. And I live in a spoiled town currently, where the minute a kid turns 18, they tell their parents they're an adult, and the parents are like, well, they're an adult, what can I do? And I'm like, they're not an adult, they're an 18-year-old asshole calling himself an adult. Some people are grown at 16, some people are grown at 18, and that's usually because we had to be. And then there are others that don't actually grow up until they're 30. Like whatever luxury you have, you do it. I think it just has to do with finding a way to believe that you can make a difference in your own world, even if you couldn't make a difference back then, which maybe that's the whole key to the sexual assault repetition thing. I don't know. But we have to keep believing that we can do more.
Great. And now that brings me to my next question. Do you think that lack of understanding, that control that we have, contributes to that high recidivism rate? Because 90%, that was probably, they said that was the worst in the nation, where like 9 out of every 10 kids that got out of the youth authority ended up right back or graduating to the state prison.
I think there's a reason it's closed. Yeah, I think if this is the only system you've ever learned to live within, like there's nothing else to look forward to, I think one of the nice things about the way the school system is set up is that in theory, there's a difference between like elementary school, middle school, high school, and then, potentially college, and then whatever you do after. And in theory, it's a chance to give us all a new tomorrow, but you have to believe that you are capable and deserving of a new tomorrow. It also depends, like, small town or not so small town, but well-known faces around town, as is more the case in like, lower socioeconomic, like, more violent, who to avoid if you grew up in a dangerous neighborhood. Similarly, if you grew up in a small town, like it's a weird thing where like you kind of know everyone-ish or have heard of them, and then it's tough to escape who you were and to become someone new. Same thing for growing up in a dangerous neighborhood. You can escape. You're either predator or prey. But maybe they were also doing something wrong on a more administrative, like top-down level,
And you brought up feeling guilt, right? And this is one thing that I learned in therapy that helped me, because I felt like I was stagnant for a while. Like I wasn't going anywhere, right? I had grew, like I escaped the gang lifestyle. I thought, okay, I'm not there, I have a family, but I wasn't really growing much outside of that, right? Like I was pretty much stuck. And my therapist told me that you have to be able to forgive yourself.
Yeah.
He says like you have to like the hardest person, like the hard, like you probably forgive everybody else already. He's like, you have to forgive yourself. And he goes, for all this stuff you did, because that was one thing that I always went back to. I always said, like things can't get better. Like I did some pretty fucked up shit. Yeah, I would always say that. Like I did some pretty bad things. And once I allowed myself to be forgiven, once I forgave myself, it felt like a huge weight was lifted. How common is that for us, for people like that were in my situation, to hold on to that guilt? And why is it so relieving? Like why is it such a refreshment once we let go of it?
It's very common, but it's common both within the system and outside of the system. And anyone who's been through any sort of trauma, like no matter what the level of trauma is, I feel like there was a period of time where like when I used to go to bed at night thinking about things that I had done wrong 10, 15 years ago. And these were not major things like, whatever, like, this was like, oh, got drunk, kissed a boy, whatever, like not major things, but like things that I was not proud of. And so things that haunted me, which is so minor. I'm also making minor of what was not so minor, but which is so minor of like, if you replayed a tape of everything wrong that you'd ever done in your life, if you were to watch anyone else's tape, you wouldn't feel the same way that they do. If I watched yours or you watched mine, our reactions would probably, like my reaction to yours, your reaction to mine would probably be like, really? Like, settle down, killer. Like, it's not such a thing. Like, which isn't to say any of us are perfect, but it's to say we're tougher judges on ourselves than we are on other people.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Well, in a best case scenario, we are. Otherwise, we're just assholes. But yeah.
Yeah, because I've seen that too. I've seen there have been, and that's one thing that it's crazy because I developed in stages, right? So one thing I had to do was learn empathy.
Yeah.
And once I learned empathy, that's when I held on to a lot of guilt. That's when the guilt really developed. Because when I was a kid, I wasn't very empathetic at all.
You weren't taught to be empathetic, and empathy does have to be taught. Like my daughter more than my son, but like I have to say, like, think about what it's like if, for my son, it comes more naturally. I don't know why. But again, proud of both of them for different things, but like we have to be taught empathy as children. And if you don't have a parent or at least one parent or a parent figure who is teaching you these things, then you're not going to learn. Mm-hmm.
And one thing that you said before, I know we didn't catch it on the interview here, but you said is that you researched me when you were getting ready for the interview. You saw me on Revenge Body, and I know one thing. How common is this? And one thing that kept me going, right? That when I felt like quitting, that I felt like, man, this is tough. It's just says like I've been through way worse. This is not shit. Like this isn't shit. How is that healthy? Is that a healthy reaction to like go back to your past?
Did it feel healthy? I mean, to me, it feels badass.
Yeah, it would motivate me. Like it would really get me pumped up. Where I'd be like, because especially when they had me in the ring with Leon, and we were going rounds, and they didn't show like we went a long time. We went about 7 rounds, and there were times where my arms were just I couldn't even lift them. They were heavy. But I said, I'm not going out like that. Like I've been through way worse than this shit. He's gonna have to kill me. He's gonna have to kill me to get me out of this ring. That's just the way I thought. And even there were a lot of times we're going through that where I thought the same thing. Like this isn't shit. This isn't shit. Like I'm gonna do this. Yeah. So is that a healthy way of
Yeah, it's called resiliency, which the way I describe it to kids is like the ability to bounce back like a rubber band when things go wrong. Mm-hmm. But like there's a whole bunch of ways to increase your resiliency or encourage your children to increase it. One of them is not like, this isn't shit, I've been through worse, but frankly, it should be. Mm-hmm. I've told this story a few times on my own podcast, which is like, I ended up becoming a psychologist because I went to this teacher who I loved. Not like in that way. That sounded really wrong. But like, I wasn't attracted to him. But I went to him because I was thinking about taking a math class, like a statistics class, and I can't add worth shit. Like, I have to have my kids add for me. It's very sad, especially when it has to do with age and year. There's too many variables there. 9 and 11, they're my brains. But so in my sophomore year of college, I went to this professor who I was taking a class and I loved, and I was like kicking ass in the class, although he took away 7 points from one of my tests because I not only gave the right answer, but I went on to tell more. And I understand I was like an asshole, but this was like the only thing that's ever come naturally to me. So
Yeah.
But so I asked him if I should take a class because I was thinking about being a psych major, and what I was really saying was, please give me approval. I've never had some in my life.
Yeah.
And I want to be a psych major, and I want you to tell me I should. And he looked me up and down. I was blonde hair, big boobs. I was hot, I have to tell you. Didn't know it then, but looking back. And he looked me up and down and was like, don't major in psychology. You'll never do anything with it. And I was like, fuck that. And I walked downstairs because I'm old and we had to do this in person. And like, I filled out a form and was like, I'm going to major in psych. And that's why I'm a psychologist today, because some asshole told me not to. So like, yes, I think it's resilient. Like, I think it's huge. I think like, fuck this, I've been through more. Like, to me, it was like, haha, that's funny. I've spent my whole life with people not believing in me.
Yeah.
I can take your bullshit, you know?
Yeah.
And I think it is a strength. Is it one we have a way to work into children's? No, because we can't go into children's homes and tell them, hey, your parents are super fucked up and you went through that, so we can do this. But as individuals, it's something we should cling to because it is huge, you know, like, I would like to think the worst is behind us, although 2020 has proven us wrong, because everything's on fire, literally now. But yeah, I think there's something huge about being able to tell yourself that you can do this, and that it's a pep talk. It's the same thing I imagine you give to your, you know, daughter or your kids. Like I give to my, like it's don't take shit from anyone.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really empowering too. Like for me, like I was like, there'd be times where I'd be like, man, am I doing the right thing? Like, is this a healthy way of doing it? But I'd say, you know what, it's working. Fuck it. I'm gonna just go with it. Like I'm gonna go with it. I think I benefited a lot from, and this is the next question, because I benefited a lot from not being addicted to any kind of, you know, narcotics. And my family, I think a lot of it has to do with me seeing my family. My grandmother was a heroin addict. My mother and father were alcoholics. And it just wasn't a lifestyle. I did use a lot of drugs as a kid, but when I went to the youth authority, I had to make a decision. Am I going to be using drugs or be gangbanging? And I chose gangbanging. So
is that a good choice?
Well, you know what? Looking back, it probably was the best choice I made because I abandoned, you know, the drugs. You know, like I gave those up.
Wait, why can't you gangbang while on drugs?
You could, but because we were in a dorm, I didn't like when I get high. Or when I used to get high, I used to get very slow. Like, whoa, I wouldn't react to things. And there were a few times on the streets when I let something go that I didn't because I didn't hear it correctly. And the homies had to tell me, hey, you got to handle that, dog. You mean like you let that go. And I said, all right, I can't get so high when I'm on the streets with certain cats because, you know, I had to really watch what I'm doing.
Right.
So when I got to YA, I said, I can't leave any room for anyone to interpret weakness. So
Sure.
I have to, you know, I have to choose. Like I had to get rid of the drugs. So I got lucky.
Can I ask what drug you were?
Oh, when I was well, I used to smoke a lot. I know weed isn't really a drug, but I did a lot of PCP, LSD, PCP, LSD. What else? There acid, did a lot of acid, rock cocaine. Just like just party, just whatever. Like I wasn't really a drug addict. I was always high though because if everybody's partying, I'm partying. And it was a good way to get girls. So I was like, hey, I got drugs. Who wants?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. So when I went to jail, I just didn't see the need for them at that point. Like, I'm not going to party with anyone. it's not going to be fun in there.
Which is impressive because like normally once you've got it in, you know, especially both parents, like it's more likely or more common, but also perhaps you had learned I don't think it's hereditary. I don't know what it is, if it's nature or nurture, but it sounds like you'd learn to make a decision. It sounds like you have very good survival skills is what it sounds like.
Well, the bad thing is that that worked out for drugs. I didn't use drugs, but it didn't work out so much for my dependency on fast food and, sugars and things like that. So, it's still there. I mean, it's just a different way. Like
I guess so. I mean,
Yeah.
did you manage to, I don't know the answer, but did you manage to more or less keep off the weight you lost in the,
until quarantine. Yeah. Now I'm working.
Fucking, it all goes to shit. Yeah.
Now I'm working on it again. But yeah, I was, I lost a significant amount of weight after the show, and quarantine came and really fucked up my program. But that's not an excuse. I got to get back on it. It's not an excuse. But
I mean, it's not, but no one saw this coming. I mean,
yeah, that's so true, because I had a great routine, and it just went to shit. But yeah, the reason I asked that is because there's a lot of people who are addicted to drugs, and I see a lot of the times they want to stay out of jail, they want to stay out of prison, but it's just
if you're motivated by like, again, if you're addicted, because you mentioned some serious substances, like, if you're motivated by something with such serious withdrawal and, whatnot, I feel like you're, that's what your world spins around, like, I feel like your world currently spins around like your daughter, your family. Yeah. But if you're motivated by, alcohol is an addictive substance, but because it's also an acceptable, thing. It's slightly different. But if you're motivated entirely by a drug, it's a whole different issue, and it's something different to overcome. And it's really tough. Like, you're lucky that you didn't have that abusive personality, or if you did, you were smart enough to be like, yeah, fuck this needs to fall second.
Yeah, I think I just got lucky, because I think I do have that addictive personality. I think as a kid I was addicted to violence. As an adult I was addicted to fast food and sugar, and even when I was working out I kind of got addicted to that.
I got addicted to working out during quarantine. But I'm like 5:30 in the morning, workout for 2.5 hours. I threw my back out last week because my back was finally like, you're old and fat, you can't do this anymore. And then I was into like the wine time, mom. And then it was eventually like 3:00 isn't wine time. It's just like, I can't deal with my kids anymore time. So yeah. But you managed to avoid it, or I understand that, like, it's a real, the sugar, the process, whatever, it's a real addiction. Agreed. But given the alternatives, you can have 8 happy meals. They're not called happy meals for adults. I'm sorry. What are they called for adults? You can have 8 Whoppers. Again, children, 8 Whoppers and still keep yourself safe, or still drive safely. Yes, heart attack. Don't recommend, but like the long versus the short term, it's clear which wins out.
That's so true. That is so true. And so before we wrap it up, is there anything else you wanted to add? Any thoughts you had on any of the conversations we had so far?
Honestly, I thought the most interesting thing was about the games. Mm-hmm. There were many things interesting. I really enjoyed being on this. Thank you. Anytime you need a shrink expert, call me. I'm a shrink expert, and I swear. So there you go. But I think the most interesting thing for me was sort of your pointing out how, and you said it casually, but it really struck me deeply, about how perhaps we call them games to diminish the importance.
Yeah.
And it really does. If it's a game, the fact that someone is dying doesn't mean as much.
Yeah. That's so true. Yeah. And it's crazy, because I think that sets up something for the future, where there's a lot of times where we will minimize everything around us going forward, because it's like people even I've heard people on the street say that's part of the game, dog. You win, you lose. And it's like,
and I've heard that too, but that's, for me, it struck me as different. I mean, I don't spend a lot of time on the street, obviously, but like, I've heard that expression, but to me, it struck me as really different than you calling it a game and like our confusion. And that to me is fucking huge. And especially when we're going through such a Well, I'm not sure if there's more police brutality or if we're just reporting it more because people are being held accountable.
I think
But
it's just cameras now.
I do too. That's my guess too. But I just wasn't sure if I'm an asshole and this has been around all the time and as much and I didn't know, then I want to also allow for my being an asshole. But so that's why I said it like that. But I think there's cameras and I think there's more accountability, holding like feet to fire for news people to report when shit gets very wrong. But I think that it's an interesting way to think about it. Whereas like, perhaps we used to, not perhaps, like clearly it used to be belittled or minimized, and now it is not.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us and great conversation. And again,
Thank
everybody,
you so much.
check out her podcast. We're going to have the link below. Also, if you could give us the links to your book, and we'll drop those below. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
Of course. Thank you.
And with that, we're out. Peace.